so bad?
Your first time seeing a god should be nothing less than an ethereal experience, because that's the only way you'll worship such characters. Let's take a look at some of them with the top 25 moments when god-level characters were introduced in the movies. Okay, so we're kicking things off with an actual god by the name of Ra from 1994's Starship. Well, he's technically an alien who hijacked a kid's body and got worshipped as a god, but look, that still counts, okay? The scene where Jack and Daniel are taken to Ra is an interesting one because what gets highlighted here is the unquestionable loyalty his subjects have towards him. I mean, this is Kurt Russell and James Spader we're talking about here. You've got Ego and Ultron fighting against Ra, and they get taken down by the power of faith as all those kids save their ruler from getting zapped by the enemy. Yes, bro was flexing without even needing to get up. Smog may not necessarily be a god, but he's pretty damn close if you consider how deadly he sounds and his general energy levels. His first encounter with Bilbo Baggins was a lot more eventful than one would assume, and trust me, one would assume a lot if it's a dragon in the picture. There's the typical moment of panic as we see Smog chasing his target through heaps and heaps of gold, which is thrilling and endangering at the same time. Normally, I'd say that it should have been me in that position, but only for the gold and not for the bloodthirsty dragon that's chasing after me. There's more to Smog other than his obvious size and powers too. He's intelligent, calm, confident, and extremely sinister. So yeah, he's got all the ingredients needed for a god-level monster. This scene was the equivalent of a money shot in context with the movie because the Kraken lived up to its hype and then some. As much as I love to see amazing makeup on Davy Jones or a diabolical Jack Sparrow, there's no creature from this entire franchise that has yet been able to surpass the Kraken. Even without showing its full body, this creature is able to spook all of us out, and the way it destroys the ship without hesitation is probably the monster's way of saying, I can flex too. Yeah, that thing definitely deserves a title like God of the Seven Seas or whatever. Look, if you're a character as badass as Shao Kahn, then it doesn't matter if your actor isn't able to act as well as he should. I mean, the same scene has probably got the worst acted line in all of cinema history, so he shouldn't be worrying about his own performance anyway. Now, I know this movie isn't exactly a masterpiece, and no one's ever going to include Shao Kahn in their best villains list, but when it comes to seeing what he can do as a godlike entity, the impact he creates is massive. I say this because Mortal Kombat fans really care a lot about this stuff. This man is called the God of the Mutants for a reason, and we can see why in this epic introduction after he reawakens. Sabon is shown before, but not in his true form, so I'm considering the part when he wakes up from his slumber and unleashes a move so powerful that it makes us all wonder what he's capable of. And from whatever else we see throughout the movie, he does a lot more than just walk the walk. Too bad he then had to switch to a guy with multiple personalities in Moon Knight. Surtur was made to look like an absolute pansy in the opening sequence of Thor Ragnarok. Like, forget being close to a god, this dude wasn't even worthy enough to call a demon. However, our introduction to him as a god is showcased extremely well when he finally awakens his true power in the grand finale of the movie. The dude is so overpowered at this point that it even takes Hela down as if it meant nothing to him. Plus, bro swatted the freaking Hulk away as if he was some kind of puny insect. The change in the audience reception towards the character also cannot be understated. After all, he did end up destroying the entire planet of Asgard, that too way beyond any further scope for habitation. So Anubis is this super badass Egyptian god of death, but we don't really get to see him in physical form during the movie. He's more of a presence who grants the Scorpion King his wishes and lends him an army of creepy monsters to help him defeat his enemies. Yes, these monsters did take on his form, so that can be used as a reference point, but we need to remember that they're not his final form. You could also say that he manifested in the form of the scorpion that The Rock ate, and then the powers we see on display are all gestures from his end. Look, if Dwayne Johnson is praying to you, then it has to be a big deal, right? Because that dude just doesn't stop winning. But yeah, the final moment when Anubis turns the Scorpion King into his eternal slave also gives us tons of context as to why he shouldn't make shady deals with supreme entities.
We have fallen into man's myths and legends. It was Asgard.
Would this video even be valid without the MCU's favourite god himself? That's right, Thor's the undisputed god of thunder, who's lived in our hearts for well over a decade now, even though his latest flick was a bit of an embarrassment. Now, you must be wondering why he comes in only at 18, given his legendary status, right? However, if we consider our introduction to him, it isn't really much to talk about. He comes off as a feisty son of a famed ruler, who's better off doing ads for L'Oreal with that insane hair of his. Like, seriously bro, how do you even maintain that kind of length? To be honest, he doesn't do a lot that would put him ahead of other entries. Having said that, the coronation scene was fun to watch because it showed us how loved the character is in his world. Plus, it did give way for the first proper battle of the movie with the Frost Giants. The Fantastic Four franchise is an oddball when it comes to cinematic success. The first movie wasn't big enough to guarantee a string of sequels, but it did manage to generate enough interest for the studio to go through with the rise of the Silver Surfer. And here we get to see Galactus, who's an entity of horrifying proportions, but his character design doesn't really do a lot of justice to him. There are shades of his actual body being highlighted occasionally, but he mostly looks like a huge fart. Having said that, this fart is powerful enough to consume a whole planet, so I wouldn't ridicule him any further. Plus, for an average Joe, this would have probably been a cool scene, because he would have assumed that Galactus is just this big godly monster who eats planets for breakfast, lunch and dinner. I really wonder how the MCU is going to show Galactus to us, so I've got my hopes up really high for first steps.
Can we talk? Okay. You win.
You will spend eternity dying. You will never win. Set me free. What do you want?
If you ever come across Dormamu, just know that being an overpowered sorcerer like Doctor Strange isn't going to help you. You've just got to be good when it comes to bargaining. Now, when we look at this clip, we see ourselves getting acquainted with Dormamu, who's clearly no less than a celestial being if he's going to end the Earth with his powers. Yes, the character design could use some work, just like it did in the previous entry with Galactus. However, with the build-up towards the character, we can safely say that the audience wasn't entirely disappointed. After all, there's a huge chunk of them who haven't read the comic, so just to see a deadly being capable of planetary destruction was enough for them. I guess negotiation skills in sales do have some use, don't they? Then again, it only helps if you have the power of an Infinity Stone by your side too. So this particular character happens to be pretty close to God when it comes to what we're told about him in schools and stuff. As per the Marvel website, the Living Tribunal is a three-faced entity who's tasked with supervising with many realities that make up the ever-expanding Marvel multiverse. As part of these duties, he eliminates or alters any worlds or universes that he deems a threat to the rest of the interconnected cosmos. So yeah, he's a lot more powerful and acts independently too, as compared to the Watchers from the Stan Lee cameo in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, or even the one from What If named Uatu. Pretty badass, right? But exactly where do we see this guy? Well, it's in a brief scene from Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but his character design is so on point that it's somewhat hard to miss him. I mean, he barely has like 5 seconds worth of screen time, but it's enough for us to realise that there are entities in the MCU who go way beyond our levels of understanding.
You are reborn.
There are good gods, then there are bad gods, and then there are psychos like Hela. That woman has powers beyond our wildest imagination, and seeing her in action pretty much proved that. I mean, the very first time we see the goddess of death, she tells Thor to submit to her Daenerys Targaryen style, and if that wasn't brutal enough already, she ends up crushing Mjolnir to little pieces after blocking a straight attack from Thor. The only reason she isn't higher up on this list is because this moment got ruined for most of us in the trailer. You know, after giving it serious thought, I've come to a very profound conclusion. Considering how both Hela and Loki turned out, you really have to question the parenting skills of Odin and his wife. Thor isn't that much of a prize either. That dude literally lost his worthiness in his own movie.
To do this together.
If you have an entire freaking planet to yourself because you created it and you also happen to be the planet itself, yeah, I don't care what anyone else says, you're a freaking god. Ego actually shows up much earlier in the movie, but that's not really a proper introduction to him as Celestial, so we're going to consider the part where he takes the Guardians to planet Ego. Of course, all isn't as it seems, which makes his overall character arc so much more interesting. As far as his powers are concerned, we don't get to see all of them, but we manage to see enough to know what's definitely a divine being. Now, when it comes to the parallels, I like how in the beginning, the movie shows Ego as a nice, humble father. His choice of colours for his planet were the kind that would make you happy and cheerful, you know, like yellow, green and pink. It's only though until everyone goes inside Ego's core that they're able to see colours like dark blue, black and grey, all of which are the kind that would make you a little bit anxious. Yeah, James Gunn had crazy attention to detail for this sequence. The word architect, I think of my mom's living room interiors. However, the one from The Matrix isn't too interested in living, although he does have an odd room. His first interaction with Neo was so nonchalant and composed that it made us all wonder if anything in that movie was actually being done by choice. The architect so eloquently explained how even though Neo was an anomaly, the sum of his actions eventually led to something that his equations had predicted. So bro was basically saying that he was on top even after a failure. As omniscient as he may have seemed here, I still couldn't get the resemblance to Colonel Sanders from KFC out of my head. Anyway, the intellectual sass the architect was giving out was so on point that Neo didn't even try to question it with violence, because he knew that it probably would have been something his opponent had expected. Also, it's crazy that I never realized the interrogation scene with Agent Smith and Neo was being watched by the architect. The beginning of that sequence had similar monitors to the ones we see here. Man, it takes a lot to dominate a scene without even standing up, but here we are with a performance that should be talked about a lot more. It's weird to see such a powerful entity in a movie about ghosts that get beaten by a bunch of dudes who look like they work in the IT industry and have a Reddit page on conspiracy theories. However, Goza is an extremely powerful force from another dimension who could very well be the level of a god, considering all the skills we see from her in the grand finale battle. In my opinion, she kinda looks like a goth version of Lady Gaga, which I know sounds redundant, but make no mistake, that woman is not messing around. Apart from her slick and impressive moves, what really stood out was her transformation into that giant Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Like, if you can get one of the Ghostbusters to say, "I'm terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought," then you've definitely achieved something. The destruction she was capable of causing in this form was without a doubt catastrophic, but I also like how the writers included elements of humour to make this sequence more entertaining. Also, if you remember the part where Winston tells Ray, "When somebody asks you if you're a god, you say yes," you should know that our boy Ray would actually remember that lesson several years later in Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Ready? Get her!
Kicking off today's top 10 is a character who's quite literally named the Supreme Being. That's right, 1981's Time Bandits gave us one of the most mesmerizing intros to a god-level entity, as the Supreme Being shows himself with an ominous visual of only his head. This was more than enough to get all the Time Bandits to not only panic, but also bow down to him once he assumed a human form. I like how he also gets straight to the point by asking where the pig is, only to transform it within seconds. This scene does a good job of showing us all what he's capable of without even making him try. Plus, I really like how they represented him as an entity who doesn't care for groveling or excessive admiration. He wants people to get off their lazy butts and get the job done, which is exactly the kind of leader this world needs. On a side note, I know this may come across as cliche, but I feel like this movie had a huge hand in the origin story of Doctor Who, mostly because of its involvement in time travel. I mean, it's very possible that the kid who would become Doctor Who was mostly inspired by the Supreme Being himself.
Celestials use energy gathered from host planets to create suns.
There's a new trend of aura farming in the modern generation that seems to attract a lot of attention. It's particularly gained prominence in anime, especially with characters like Sun Jin-woo from Solo Leveling. However, aura has always been a constant in the world of film and television, and if we look at the Celestials from the Eternals, we can see the levels at which they operated. We already saw Ego in an earlier entry, but these Celestials just hit different. Guys like Aries are designed so well and presented as such powerful beings that even the likes of Galactus or Dormamu fall short in terms of big screen intimidation. I mean, they're designed so well that even if we didn't get any kind of backstory for them, they'd still have wound up on this list, albeit maybe not as high as number 9. I'm not a fan of this movie, but apart from some fight scenes, the only characters I find dope are the Celestials. Seeing these godly entities for the first time was an overwhelming experience, because it's the one point in the movie where you're actually wondering how important it is not to mess with these guys. Alas, if only this sentiment was carried throughout the movie, it would have done so much better than its performance.
Let us find out where this goes. You two, get the keymaker. You know your predecessors had much more respect.
People very rarely look beyond the first Matrix film, but just as I mentioned the Architect before, here's another badass entity who's the tech equivalent of a supreme being. The Merovingian is supposed to be this old program who resides within the Matrix, but he's so much more as we learn tons about him in the restaurant scene. The dude is the main focus and everyone's attention is on him, which becomes an even bigger achievement when you realise Monica Bellucci is also in the room and also happens to be his wife. Yeah, only a god can flex this much opulence. What's captivating about this character is that he's comfortable with the way things are, that he doesn't even bother to get affected by the rebellious tones of Neo and Morpheus. To blatantly tell them that choice is an illusion would be like telling a cat that it's lactose intolerant. While both may be true at times, the logic is sound, and that's what puts our heroes at unease around him. The actor playing him, Lambert Wilson, totally owned this role, and seeing him speak about his love for French was a nice little touch to add levels to his character. And yes, if word gets out that this dude can make a woman finish by just consuming a slice of cake, he's bound to have tens of millions of worshippers in seconds.
Join us.
If you're named the Ancient One, there's no way people aren't going to assume you're a god. I mean, she does have a whole cult of sorcerers following her, so she's already got her own religion, which more than qualifies her for the entry. Moreover, the skill she displayed when we first see her taking on Caecilius was epic and trippy. Yeah, we all know that nothing will beat that astral trip she sent Doctor Strange on, but that wasn't our first scene with her, so we'll stick to this fight, or should I say, absolute display of domination. Everyone tried their best to get one over her, but it was of no use as she was able to take them all on with ease. The best part was that she didn't even need to say a word for the enemies to realise they were in way over their head trying to compete with her. I mean, the woman forced Caecilius to retreat because he realised there was no way he was going to top her divine intervention. I know a lot of this scene is dependent on CGI and stuff, but I'm sure the cinematography also had to be on point for us to get such an excellent viewing experience.
When one of you will have to defend that peace. I now take from you your power.
Yeah, he might not be a good parent, but that's a rare sight nowadays anyway. It's typical of a god to be introduced while doing something badass, and Odin's story is no different. We could have probably shown him as some regal king sitting on his throne with all of his subjects bowing down to him, which would have also been pretty cool. But instead, we see him taking down the frost giants and securing the W for the people of Asgard. We need to remember that this is the man who gave birth to freaking Thor, so he's bound to have some aura of his own, right? Showing him without his eye was a neat touch to show how he too was susceptible to damage, but it was his resolve that got him to the point where he's at. Of course, having Sir Anthony Hopkins play the character also adds a lot of value to his existence, but overall, the audience was shown a relentless ruler who was a lot more than worthy of the title of a god. You know what's really funny to me? Odin lost his eye fighting the frost giants, while Thor lost his while fighting Hela. And then you've got Nick Fury, who acts the most badass out of the lot, but lost his eye because of a cat. Yes, I know what the creature is actually supposed to be, but it is still pretty funny, right?
Next.
Pain, panic. Got a little riddle for you.
And you are wearing his merchandise!
He was as mean as he was ruthless.
Man, the animation standards from 1997 were so good, which makes it all the more baffling as to why visual effects have been on such a downward spiral of late. Anyway, my focus is on the appearance of Hades, who spooks us all, even though this is supposed to be an animated film for kids. His character actually makes me realise why Disney likes to add so much humour to all its movies, especially the MCU. This guy was a total diva, but he was presented in a way that actually worked for the movie. Here we first see him when Zeus is celebrating the birth of his son, and we immediately realise that this dude is going to be up to no good soon. Not that it stops us from witnessing one of the most iconic villains in animation of all time. Kudos to James Wood as well for voicing this character with so much passion that Disney kept coming back to him whenever they needed a new dub for Hades. Also, here's a fun fact. In the finished dub, Hades says that he hasn't felt this warm inside since he swallowed a matchstick. When you look at his hair, this makes the joke a lot better thanks to the context.
God, you really are.
Surprises don't always have to be pleasant, but they can have a godly vibe. The moment Aries reveals himself to Diana is a masterfully executed scene that introduces us to his godly state in a way that feels both grand and shocking. Unlike typical divine appearances, Aries doesn't arrive with thunder or celestial spectacle. Instead, the film cleverly subverts expectations by having him emerge from an unassuming human form. Yeah, you can definitely see Zack Snyder's writing in effect here. The dark tone of the scene definitely made it feel like we were meeting the devil rather than a divine being, and I wouldn't have it any other way. This twist makes the reveal all the more impactful, showing us all that gods can walk amongst mere mortals completely unnoticed. When Ares finally sheds his human disguise, it is a sight to behold. His armor manifesting around him was a visually stunning sequence, with fire and metal shaping into the iconic, warlike figure that embodies destruction itself. The transition from manipulative politician to badass god is smoother than Japanese whiskey, reinforcing the idea that he's been orchestrating conflict from behind the scenes rather than engaging in direct combat. That is, of course, until Wonder Woman herself came along. And yet, bro kicks off an epic battle that is indeed worthy of the gods. Okay, this scene doesn't really need any justification because it's a literal meeting of gods. I'm not joking, they're all here. But since I have to choose one character to highlight, I'll go ahead with Zeus for a very obvious reason. First of all, he's legit the king of the gods, and on top of that, the authority he commands here is undisputed. Choosing Liam Neeson to play this character was a wise decision because he has the height, the voice, and the charisma to pull off such a dominant god. Plus, the man was fresh off the success of the OG Taker movie, so he was already commanding a lot of respect as a mere human. I'll shout out Hades over here too, who actually makes another appearance on the list, although the previous one was from an animated movie. Ralph Fiennes sure seems to have some kind of affinity towards such characters, especially considering bro's freaking Voldemort. What really did it for me was Zeus's rage and anger over his own creations not honouring his legacy. I mean, he is a god after all, so he does deserve to be a little upset. All in all, this was a magnificent scene which nicely captured the look and feel of a meeting amongst supreme beings. We may be familiar with orange is the new black, but when it comes to Gandalf, he's more suited to white is the new grey. So if you haven't watched Lord of the Rings and want to know why someone like Gandalf is a god-level entity, then look no further than the heavenly light that serves as a prefix to his legendary entry. Mind you, this is his official return to the movie after that epic sequence in the previous film, and seeing Gandalf once again was a great moment for the fans. Also, he's not Gandalf the Grey anymore, but Gandalf the White, which can roughly translate to, I got a power boost. Just look at how all the others instinctively bow down to him. That's aura that you just can't replicate. Plus, when we see how he had to struggle to be reborn with his new powers, it pretty much explains why he's such a strong presence now. Yeah, I will admit that maybe trolling them with that overly dramatic entrance was a bit too much, but I gotta say, Gandalf sure looks like he's got his priorities set. Bro uses more magic in this scene to prank his friends than he does in the entire War for the Ring. Ah yes, our number one entry presents an extremely badass character who's most definitely a par with godly beings, but his creation was rather tragic, which actually aligns with some of the religions of the world as well. I won't get into too much detail about that, but what I will focus on is our introduction to Dr. Manhattan, who's born from the otherwise simple John Osterman, who could have avoided all of this had he simply chosen not to go back for his wristwatch. However, that would have prevented us from witnessing the birth of the one and only Dr. Manhattan, whose very first appearance kind of felt as if the world finally met its Lord and Saviour. Yeah, I know he's not actually descended from the heavens, but the aura depicted from Dr. Manhattan is so tremendous that even the viewers watching it on the big screen are made to feel a little heavy just by understanding what it must be like to be in the presence of such an omniscient being. The tragic nature of his existence also enhances the experience for us, especially with those tiny little flashbacks to John's past right before he gets disintegrated in front of our very eyes. Man, Zack Snyder really knows how to dramatize anything that comes his way. And yeah, I know I've been tough on Janie in the past for not even wanting to look at John during his final moments, but I get it. I can't even watch myself kill a cockroach, so I shouldn't be too judgmental.
I said, leave me alone!
Hope you liked the video. Please subscribe to the TV Regent, and here's another video that I know you're going to enjoy.